So around the world this morning, the Trump administration making major moves on the global stage this week.
From Moscow to the Caribbean to here in New York at the United Nations. Joining us now to break it all down is Fred Fleitz. He's a former NSC chief of staff under the Trump administration and a senior fellow at the America First Policy Institute. Also, Peter Doran is a Russia program fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good morning, gentlemen, and happy Thanksgiving. We'll start with you here, Fred. The Trump administration saying Steve Witkoff is likely to meet with the Russian president next week in Moscow with hopes of ending the war in Ukraine and finalizing a U.S. brokered peace plan. Now, the interesting part here is Army Secretary Dan Driscoll is very much involved in the peace brokerage. And according to Trump, headed to speak with Ukrainian officials this week. People are saying that, Fred, this is a move possibly put in place by Vice President J.D. Vance, as he and Driscoll are seen as allies in Washington. So what's your take?
Well, this is a very ambitious plan that tries to repeat the success of the president's Gaza war peace plan, which got a ceasefire in place and got all the living hostages out. And I think Trump is hoping to replicate that with this plan. I think both sides are pretty far apart. I don't think Putin wants peace. But look, Zelensky is playing this well. He has said he will accept this plan. There's a few things he wants to work out. There are major differences, but he's basically going to say yes. He's going to let Putin say no, which means I think if it goes down, Trump will move to putting tougher sanctions on Putin, and then we'll go through this process again. But I'd like to see this succeed, but right now I don't think Putin wants peace, and I think the indications are he's probably not going to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, Peter, what's your take on the plan? As Fred points out, Putin is likely not to accept the plan, but what in the plan might actually entice him, and what are some issues in the plan that it might actually cause some issues with regard to final execution?
Well, thanks, John. And I agree with what Fred said. We still have a significant gap between the lip and the cup here. Essentially, we have two peace plans. We've got one peace plan that the Russians will agree to. We've got another peace plan, that's the one that got hammered out in Geneva over the weekend, that the Ukrainians and the Europeans will agree to. But the key here is that Russia and Ukraine have to agree to the same plan. As I will be surprised if Vladimir Putin accepts any deal given to him by Special Envoy Witkoff that allows Ukraine to, say, enter into NATO, that allows European militaries to act as peacekeepers and guarantors of Ukraine's security. There are many red lines that I believe Putin's not going to want to cross in this current version, and so the fighting will continue. The cycle will repeat again.
Yeah, I think it would have been better to have Putin agree to a plan first, because I don't think Putin wants to follow Zelensky. Zelensky is already on board with this plan, so by default, Putin probably will reject it. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll be watching very closely. Turning to this, just hours after General Kane met with the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Pentagon announced that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth will also travel to the Caribbean on Wednesday to meet with top leaders in the region. Fred, does this recent developments signal a more aggressive U.S. posture in the Caribbean, perhaps even laying out groundwork for future action against Venezuela?
I think it's already a fairly aggressive operation, which reflects the president's determination to stop the flow of illegal drugs and criminal gangs into the United States, which he thinks is a threat to U.S. national security. He's not going to let the UN or international law stop him from destroying these drug boats or a government that is actually manufacturing drugs and shipping them to the U.S. Having said that, I think Trump's going to speak to Maduro. I don't think Trump wants to get involved in regime change. He wouldn't mind if Maduro left. But I think he's going to make it clear that the drug trafficking, the flow of drugs from Venezuela has to stop, or we could see tougher U.S. military action against Venezuela.
Peter, how do you see this meeting between President Trump and President Maduro going? And secondly, what do you see in the future with regard to any particular collaboration with Caribbean countries as President Trump looks to strategically make sure that the flow of drugs stop coming to America from South America?
Well, we can recall back in the day that the United States used to have something called gunboat diplomacy. What we're seeing President Trump do is deploy super carrier diplomacy. The old adage was speak softly and carry a big stick, as we learned from Teddy Roosevelt. President Trump, well, I don't think he speaks very softly, and the military armada he has assembled sends a message far louder than any words can. He's applying pressure. I don't expect to see us invading Venezuela anytime soon, but the designation of these actors as narco-terrorists opens up a whole new tool set for the president to use against them.
Well, now turning to the United Nations here in New York, where the administration promised to, quote, clean house. Let's listen to Ambassador Jeff Bartos.
We've only been here 2 months, and thanks to President Trump's leadership and the leadership of Ambassador Waltz and the whole team here in the U.S., we've already saved over $1 billion in UN spending. $1 billion in 2 months, and we're just getting started. To give you a sense of some of the crazy stuff that goes on across the street or here in this building, they spend $360 million last year on meetings, conferences, and reports. $360 million. Over $70 million on tuition reimbursement for colleges and universities for UN employees.
Wow, $1 billion saved in 2 months. So some of the spending cuts outlined yesterday include 25% cut to the organization's global peacekeeping force, 2,600 UN bureaucratic positions that are slated to be cut, and an overall slashing of 15% to the UN's budget. Fred, what do you make of these cuts and reforms to the UN?
Look, the UN is notoriously wasteful, and after 4 years of the Biden administration where nothing was done to rein in UN spending, it's not a surprise it got out of control. And frankly, the first Trump administration didn't do much about this. It's a cleanup of the UN is long overdue, and it has to be focused on promoting international peace and security and Western human rights values. And it is now bloated. It's controlled by radical third world states. It's pushing DEI. A lot of work has to be done there.
Yeah, it can't just be a mouthpiece for our adversaries to get out there and condemn our strongest allies, namely what happened with Israel this past year.
You know, Peter, I was quite surprised to see $70 million going to universities and colleges through tuition reimbursement programs. There's probably a laundry list of other items that need to be cut. What do you think will actually end up happening? Because the way I see it, if you really want to procure the right change, you start with controlling the wallet and the purse. What say you?
You know, what Ambassador Waltz is doing is very encouraging. It does remind me a bit of a famous quote by Ronald Reagan when he was discussing the UN. He said, well, we pay for the thing, but does that also mean we have to listen to them? And I think that's where we are right now. Obviously, the United States needs to defend its national security and foreign policy priorities first. And to the extent we can work with allies and partner states at the UN, great. But it has certainly become, as Fred pointed out, a rogues gallery over there in New York. And I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole.
Yeah. Well, definitely we'll be watching all of the major foreign policy developments, despite the fact that it's Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you know what? We'll be carving turkey as well as carving the UN's budget.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Fred and Peter. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.